and you're very welcome to a podcast which runs a keen eye over all the comings and goings of the Irish League. My name is Peter Cinnamon, and in the past 7 days we've seen the villagers go to the city and earn a point, the champions go to a village and give up 3, and most impressive of all, Danny Perkins showed that he can score from a mere 3 yards out as well. We ask, are the Glens and Coleraine in disarray as the Blues and Lorne look to have found their mojo? We'll recap the weekend's games, reflect on some of the big talking points from my interview with NIFL CEO Gerard Lawlor, and look ahead to this Friday's BelClassico, all on this week's edition of Kicking Match. You're locked in to what I can describe as the flagship pod of the week, the one where we get to cover games, and my goodness, do we have plenty to natter through this time round. Therefore, I better get my skates on and get my guest in here pronto. Returning to the podcast, it is fantastic to welcome back former sports editor of the Ballymena Times. It's Stephen Alexander.
Hi Peter, how are you doing? Thanks for having me back.
It's great to have you back. I only want to bring people on when there's reasons for celebration, jubilation, and of course, every weekend of Irish League football warms the little cockles of our football reporting or journalistic heart. But let's not pretend. It's one of those rarities now in the current year, 2023, for Ballymena United. A win. They're coming not as often as you'd like them to, but I'm sure you took your drive home to Ballymena from Dungannon with little pep in your step.
It certainly was a bit more pleasurable, Peter, than some this season. Yeah, as you say, Ballymena victories are a bit of a rare commodity, a bit like hen's teeth this year.
Well, that and plenty. It's actually a really, really good weekend of games, so there's a lot to sink our teeth into when we do. But before we jump into all that, this week you get a 2-for-1 if you're a listener of Kicking Match. You may have seen that at the start of this week, if you're tuning into this, the week that it comes out, I dropped an interview with NIFL CEO Gerard Lawlor. Look, he's done plenty of interviews and bits of media off the back of this 5-year plan. I did a big podcast last week with Stephen Crawford going through bits and pieces that they put down to paper. It was my chance to chat with him and put some of the questions that I've been thinking in my head and chatting about with people like you, Stephen, about where they're going to go, how they're going to get to. And you can put this here as the little dotted line where if you still want to listen to that podcast without any spoilers, you want to hear it fresh, you can go do that. It'll be the episode that came just before this podcast, but let's consider this the post-game show from that podcast. Lot to go through, and I think a lot of the stuff I don't think will surprise people. I think a lot of the stuff is all ahead of us of where we could go, but one of the things which somewhat contradicts reports that I saw last week when they're looking through the amount of teams in the top flight that potentially are behind this idea of a change in season schedule. There was talk last week that it was in a minority of managers who wanted it to happen. Chatting to Gerard, he thinks, or at least they believe, that they have 7 out of the 12 are interested, and this is the clubs rather than any individual person, are interested in some form of change. I doubt that they all believe in the same flavour of season schedule change, but I think that is significant. If that is the case, the fact that there's now 7 teams who are looking for a change, it really does underline exactly why this is such a debate of the moment.
Very much so, Peter. I think, to be honest as well, there's some confusion, some conjecture as to who exactly will have a say in this, or who exactly will have a vote. I mean, will it be all NIFL clubs throughout the 3 divisions? And I mean, in that case, if someone from the Championship or clubs in the Championship or the Premier Intermediate League are getting a vote, really, what will be the incentive for them to shift the season? I mean, I think depending on how many clubs actually get a vote in this, it could make it possibly harder for them to push the summer football idea through.
And that's one of the other really interesting points for me. I did push him on this and asked, however we get to this vote, and we very much need our own Brexit terminology. We can't call this summer football vote anymore because now it's change in summer schedule, which I'm going to trip over every time I try to say it. But I did ask, okay, we're going to have this vote. He said in the next 6 months they're going to sit down and talk through and get the motor running when it comes to this. But I asked, and I didn't mean to pick out the two teams that I did, but I picked out two teams from the Championship and the PIL respectively. And I said, do these clubs have exactly the same vote as, let's say, a top end Premiership team? And he said, at the moment, yes. And they weren't quite sure if this was a 50+1. Is that what you need to get this through? Does it need to be a 70% majority? So whenever we get to this vote, and it's not clear if a vote is going to be the way that this is decided, but if we do get to that, they don't know how it's going to go. But if they are going to go with the current rules, and I just in their gut says that it might not go down this route, it will be as equal. And you say that very clearly. You could have there's absolutely a scenario where all of a sudden there's the top 12 teams. You could even say the top 20 teams in the country based on their league order are all saying summer football or a change in season schedule. Yes, please. But it's the teams below them which are saying no, they don't want to change. And there is definitely two sides of the aisle who say this is what this is all about. It's a democracy. They have their vote and they are equally allowed to have that opinion and should fight for that opinion. And of course the other side, which I think is absolutely central and integral to the current politics of football in this country, there's teams at the top end who feel as though they are not having autonomy over how they want to run their football. Not all teams in the Premiership clearly want to have a change in summer schedule, but if there is a majority, and particularly if that majority is weighted towards the top end of football in this country, we have a very significant standoff, I feel.
Yeah, I would imagine that's correct, Peter. The thing about it is obviously the clubs will clearly they'll have their say on it, but I mean there are so many other stakeholders in the whole debate, aren't there? And the one I think Gerard was saying in some of his some of the media outlets, that they want to consult with everybody, they want to have the grown up conversation. The one group of people, Peter, who I really hope aren't overlooked in all this are the supporters. I mean, will the supporters back this? And really, how are you going to get a flavour of whether supporters will back it or not? The only way, realistically, is if you basically lobby every season ticket holder of certainly every Premiership club, possibly every NIFL club, because the season ticket holders, Peter, are the ones who are committed to it over the long term. They're putting their money where their mouth is to buy a season ticket to follow their particular team throughout the course of a season. And I understand there will be that NIFL are trying to attract new fans, and of course we want to see a new generation of fans as well. But I mean, really, maybe those are the people who maybe only attend one, maybe two games a year. Really, are they going to be sort of influenced by someone saying, "Oh yes, I'd love to see summer football"? Well, how many times do you go and watch your team? Well, Boxing Day and maybe one other or something like that. I think really it would be really sort of remiss of NIFL not to give the sort of the tried and trusted, the long term supporters their viewpoint as well.
There is a wide range of reasons why people would be proponents of a change of the league schedule. And one of those things that would keep coming back is the weather and the state of pitches and putting people off due to that. And one of the things I took from that interview is that, yes, that is one component of it, but what we are really looking at and what seems to be now the new central argument for moving the current season is actually attention. And it's filling a void, filling a market and a space as content when there isn't any other competitors when it comes to football, men's football in particular, within the British Isles. He brought that up how just through filling television schedules, even going with different partners, he mentioned like betting and stuff like that, that could draw more people in. That seems to be the thing that they kept pointing to. Yes, you may draw in more people due to better weather. We don't know that for sure, but that's one thing that's been talked about for well over 10 years. what's becoming more to the forefront of this discussion is, can we attract beyond even Northern Ireland, which seems strange for this league, but when things become more global, that actually being this summer league that's being played within the British market, they think there is potentially big opportunities there from a broadcasting point of view. And to stay in the broadcasting point of view, one thing which did actually surprise me, I outright asked, we keep comparing ourselves to the League of Ireland. League of Ireland have this streaming service, LOI TV. Could we see NIFL TV? And Gerard feels that's definitely on the cards. I was the one saying, but where are we going to get the money? Where are we going to get infrastructure? He thinks, who cares? Let's make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you look at that 5-year plan, Peter, there's an awful lot going on within that strategy. I mean, even the very fact that the strategy was titled "A Bold and Brighter Future for Professional Football," I mean, it gives you a fair idea of the direction of travel. I mean, NIFL has done some tremendous work in making the Irish League, if we call it that, in old money, much more marketable and much more appealing as a product. I mean, the evidence is there to see in increased attendances and much more coverage of the league already through media partners. Like you think of, regular live streaming of games by the BBC. But I think we're reaching a pivotal stage in this process now, because some people are saying, yeah, let's carry on that momentum and grow it even bigger. But I think there's a train of thought now in some quarters that everything is really being geared towards the full-time clubs. The main reason you obviously hear the advocates for summer football putting forward, it'll help Irish League clubs in Europe. Well, I mean, what are the advantages for the clubs who don't qualify for Europe? Part-time clubs, those players have other jobs outside of football. Maybe the only time they can take their holidays is dictated to them by their occupations. For example, a teacher being off in July and August. Maybe factory workers whose place of employment maybe closes over the 12th holidays. That's the only time of year that these people get to take a break and spend time with their families as well, without the added difficulty of having to keep their football manager happy as well.
I've been thinking a lot about the central conflict which you just highlighted with this new era of Irish League football. How much do we try to push forward for these clubs who are at the top end, who are professional, trying to just will on and improve their own fortunes? And how do you balance that out? Do you balance that out to make it quote unquote fair or a more even playing field for the clubs who aren't able to take that leap and be professional? You give a variety of external factors, considerations for players who aren't full time. And at least this is my own personal analysis. I'm not putting words in his mouth. I'm starting to believe the sentiment now is that those teams that have been able to go full time, yes, that is an advantage, but it's an advantage that they've created for themselves. And if you want to benefit from said advantages, I don't believe that they want to pull them down. I think the idea is, if they're running away with it or they're running away towards the future, it's not about holding these clubs that are pushing forward back. It's now them turning to those teams and saying, well, if you want to keep up, you better run faster. And I think this comes down to a debate which was bubbling just underneath around a push for Friday night games, Tuesday night games. Is it unfair for a Newry or Carrick or whoever part-time team you want to pick out there? Is it unfair of them to play against a full-time team on a Friday, like a Larne, when they haven't been able to prep? And I believe the sentiment going forward is, it might not be, but Larne's pushing forward, and if you can't keep up, that's just unfortunate. But that's just what I'm feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Peter, that the whole thing seems to be geared towards eventually having a fully professional league, or certainly as many professional teams as possible in it. I've always had a concern ever since this idea was first being floated. I've always had that concern just about how financially viable that'll be in the long term, just simply because I just don't. I'm not sure that model's sustainable in the long term. And I mean, by sustainable, I mean being able to bring in enough money to cover the fairly significant outgoings, which obviously will be mainly, full-time wages. If you can do that by qualifying for Europe, or maybe by selling a young player to a cross-channel club with the various add-ons included in that deal, then yes, maybe that's fine. But I mean, none of those things are guaranteed. Like, The European money, for example, I actually thought it was a very concerning situation this summer that the four teams who qualified for Europe were the teams who currently have full time status or 3/4 full time, to use Crusaders' own terminology. I mean, you could see a situation developing there where those would be the teams qualifying for Europe every year, and that would only succeed in making the rich even richer and widening the gap between them and the rest of the league, which I don't think is maybe a particularly healthy situation. Since then, of course, there's a slight change in the landscape with Cliftonville announcing plans for their hybrid model, maybe something along the lines of Crusaders with some full-time players alongside part-time. But then now you have Forian and Carrick both announcing significant investment from outside. So all of a sudden that's now 7 teams who would maybe have aspirations to be going full-time to some extent, all battling for 4 European places. I mean, a lot of those clubs' business model will be actually based upon the premise of qualifying for Europe and maybe even getting through a round. So for 3 of those teams to miss out on European money, given the outlay that they'll spend on full-time wages, that's really significant.
This will be an absolutely pivotal conversation point and something that's been highlighted here. We are starting to see clubs that are veering into financial difficulties, and we've seen the push. We keep comparing ourselves to the League of Ireland. I've talked about this on this podcast till people are blue in the face. We all know there's been examples in there ever so the growing pains of their 20 years of moving to the summer and being a full-time league broadly across the spectrum there. So we will have our own growing pains as we move into this era and as we get to some form of normality, however many teams there is that are full-time long-term. And I also think the situation with NIFL, how many teams, we will come back to this and we will see this discussion come back up. He highlights in that interview how the League of Ireland is 2 teams of 10. We have 3 leagues, and the difference between the full-time teams or even the teams just below those full-time teams and the PIL teams, that's a really, really big gap in what it is like to be day to day. So what NIFL looks like in 5 years could be significantly different. Could the PIL go completely, or does it expand? Do we see some super championship? I don't know, but we will see a huge amount of moving plates, I believe, when it comes to the formation of the league. But if you want to hear all the things he said, I would highly recommend it. Hear exactly the words coming straight from his mouth. You can check out that podcast right now on whatever your podcast platform is. Let's get to the games, and we'll start with one of these full-time teams that are gunning for the title. And I think it's fair to say that it was an absolute banner week for the Blues. 2-0 against the Crews, and then they return to their home to do what feels like their annual thumping of Newry in South Belfast. First off, it's always great to score lots of goals and put 6 on the board, but I think a lot of people expected that. The Crews didn't go into that game on Tuesday night burning on all cylinders, but Linfield are starting to show, I know it's only early days, but they look relentless right now. Whatever is in their way, they're dealing with it with incredible efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, as I was driving home from the match at Dungannon on Saturday, I caught a few minutes on the radio of Dean Shields, who was the studio guest on Sports Sound, and the very last question that Eric White put to him was who would win the league. And Dean, absolutely quick as a flash, replied that Linfield would win it by a margin of at least 10 points.
10 points.
10 points. I mean, I'm not quite sure I would agree with such a large winning margin, but I mean, there's an old adage, isn't there, Peter, in Irish League football? If you finish ahead of Linfield in the league table, there's a good chance you'll win the league, and I think this year's no different. I mean, the strange thing about Linfield this year, I don't think they're as strong defensively, maybe, as some other years. But when you think about how many of those many Linfield title triumphs were based around like a virtually impenetrable defence. But what they do have an awful lot about them going forward this season. Joel Cooper is a terrific player at this level, one who can just produce a moment of magic from out of nowhere. And Another player who I think has really stepped up to the plate this season is Chris McKee. Obviously, I think Ito Vertanen was the main man in attack last year, but since he left, I think Chris McKee has really stepped out of his shadow.
And somebody needed to step up there, and he so far is the main man. Matthew Fitzpatrick is finding his feet up at the top end of the pitch in that David Healy side, but they always have these complete unsung heroes, and the man who is secretly wearing the cape at the minute is Cal McLean. He's dictating play in midfield. He's the engine in there. He's stepping up and getting goals. And the amount of assists he's had this season is really going under the radar. And despite this Linfield team not being one that has a lot of fireworks about it, they have players like Cal McLean and Chris Shields who are just, they're the efficiency in this team that is creating these plays to get these other players in, to get the goals for the likes of Kirk Miller. And that goal against Crusaders on Tuesday night, just tiki-taka pinging it all around, and Matthew Fitzpatrick running in and heading the ball, like it was just a great little bit of play. It felt very un-Linfield-esque. You don't think of them as this free-flowing team, but when they got the space, they really showed what they can do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you actually mentioned Kyle McLean there, because he is a player who has really caught the eye this season. I think he has really blossomed now, and you often hear Linfield fans saying, well, how will we ever replace Jamie Mulgrew whenever his time is eventually up? The answer may well already be there. Kyle McLean is really sort of bossing that midfield area now, and as you say, he's really added that side to his game now. He's setting up chances, he's creating things. A really good player.
And after that loss to Larne away, they have been able to tighten up this defence. That was something which they came into the season a bit leaky, and it's been their defence which has let them down in spots, which is not given them the absolutely perfect record. But since then, they keep a clean sheet against Loughgall, which is a lot more impressive now after the week and a half that we've seen. They keep a clean sheet against Crusaders, and bar really a runaway goal from Newry when Linfield were home and hosed and had the game won. They look to be scoring goals. They're keeping it tighter at the back. They'll go into these next set of games feeling confident, and it's a position that we see them in, and they're very used to this driving down the motorway at a relentless speed, taking out whatever comes their way. They didn't look to be comfortable in this team that's dealing with a bad start. They're really at their best when they know that the other team's worried a bit more, when they have the confidence in them. They've always been that confidence, this team that's strong mentally to deal with the pressure. This other pressure that they had last season clearly spooked them, and it could all fall down with this massive game on Friday. But it's really not looking good for Glentoran on Friday ahead of the BelClassico.
Yeah, I mean, Glentoran as well. It's hard to put your finger on what's happening there. I mean, it's basically just it's not really sort of working for them at the moment. That was a very disappointing result, and by all accounts, a very disappointing performance at Carrick at the weekend. And as you say, probably the last fixture they would want at this moment in time would be to run up against a bang in form Linfield team. But having said that, how many times in games like that have the form book just is tossed completely out the window? I mean, a really eagerly anticipated game this weekend.
And just the reverse of the couple of weeks that Linfield's had. Glentoran go a couple of weeks ago, beat Newry City 4-2, and since then they draw at home to Dungannon in what was a pretty dire game. They then lose to Coleraine at home, being completely passed around the park by Coleraine, and then they go and have what should be a get-right game against Carrick away from home. They have the lead, and in a 2-minute blitz, they completely throw it away. People always think a run like this is coming, and everything will hang on what happens this Friday. But it feels like we can wipe that chart down of how many days since the last Glentoran crisis, because it feels like we are days away from the annual drama of the season 2023-2024. This is clockwork, which must be even infuriating for fans in East Belfast.
Yeah, I mean it's not going terribly well for Warren Feeney at present, and he seems to be copping a fair bit of flack from the Glens fans. And I mean, you can understand their frustration because after the roller coaster of the Mick McDermott era, the Glens seemed to have steadied the ship a bit under Rodney McAree. He guided them back into Europe via the playoffs before Rodney went back to Dungannon. I mean, Warren has inherited a very, very talented squad of players. I mean, he's been able to add even more talent to it, like Dara O'Connor and players like that. But for whatever reason, Peter, they just aren't firing on all cylinders at the minute.
They have had injuries, like McCullough's out at the minute, Reece Marshall's out at the minute. But looking at this team that played against Carrick Rangers, they have plenty of talent. McGinn, McLean, Sule, Singleton, Donnelly, McCartan, Burns, Wilson, Kane. So
show me a manager, Peter, who wouldn't want a team of players like that.
If we're having a temperature check on all the managers' seats, I must say I think Feeney's is probably the hottest in the league right now, because the fans are frustrated. They have a run of games where they would like to have got far better results than just taking 1 point in 9. And it's the way that they throw it away against Carrick. It's a 2-minute blitzkrieg from them. They both come from Carrick's right hand side, and particularly that second goal. How on earth is Perkis able to keep his balance, trap the ball, and just wait for that right moment to flick the boot to fire in the goal? I just watched that goal with my jaw on the floor, because there's so many things that could and should have went wrong, but it's the balance and the poise to finish that. That only could have been a striker who is feeling himself who puts that away.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be Perkis as well, of all players, having left Glentoran. But I mean, I think that looking at and listening to some of Warren's interviews afterwards, he was fairly critical of his players. He said he felt let down, and again, it's different managers will approach that in different ways. But I mean, certainly a lot of managers that I've dealt with in my time, they will always come out and they will possibly. They'll take the blame for the defeat. Now, what they say behind the closed door of a changing room might be very, very different to that. But it's to use that old phrase there. I don't know about managers sort of throwing players under the bus there. That's the sort of thing that possibly can breed a bit of disenchantment as well.
He's not getting a tune out of them, and this Friday night fixture is going to be such a massive test, because if he can't get those players, or those players are unwilling to deliver and perform in what is one of the biggest fixtures and footballing occasion this island has to offer, then it's the usual, I don't know what to say to you, so a lot's riding on this game. One team trying to get out of a funk, not to be embarrassed by their rivals, the other one in Linfield not wanting to let this be a banana skin. Like, Larne fans are going to be transfixed to that game on Friday, and it's just going to be another huge occasion. But let's not skip over Carrick here. They came into that game 3 losses on the bounce. Stuart King didn't have a particularly icy cold seat that he was sitting on. He was feeling the pressure. And it's just hard to get your head around this Carrick Rangers team. We went through that Glentoran team name by name. This Carrick team has plenty of talent, plenty of experience to it, and they've been on the wrong end of a couple of results, despite some cracking goals from Perkis. I'm sure Perkis was delighted to finally be the man that's scoring a goal and is able to celebrate 3 points after this. Huge result for Stuart King, and as we'll always say in this situation, he'll want to believe his season starts right now.
Yeah, I mean, outside of covering a lot of Ballymena games last season. Probably the team that I've covered most often in matches was Carrick, and I watched their progress last season with great interest. I thought Stuart did a terrific job there, and I mean, he added to that panel of players in the summer, and I think at that stage there were maybe question marks going, where are Carrick sort of getting the money to sign the likes of Purgus and Joe Crow and Albert Watson and whatnot. Then obviously the news came of their American investment. Certainly, Stuart is a hugely ambitious manager, and Carrick now look to basically be sharing Stuart's level of ambition. He really wants to drive that club forward. That's why the first couple of months of this season have probably been hugely frustrating for Stuart. He has said that they just have struggled to find consistency, but there are a lot of very, very good players in that Carrick side now. That they are a team who I believe are heading in the right direction.
And the team that's coming up to face them this weekend, it's the belle of the ball. I'm going to let you wax lyrical about them because it's just become a running bit on this podcast. I know I'm not the first person to say this Loughgall team is great and fun to watch, but wow, they beat Larne at home, a result I didn't even see coming. And then they go to Cliftonville and they put on a clinic. They get out of Solitude with a well-earned point. I got plenty of communication from Red fans saying, you're right, this Loughgall side is the real deal. And they were on Football Focus on Saturday. Like, this Loughgall team, so hot right now.
Yeah, I mean they're getting all the plaudits that they deserve at present. I watched them a few weeks ago. They won 3-1 at Ballymena, where honestly, Peter, their second half performance was terrific. They actually, I remember that day Ballymena went in a goal up with Colin Coates heading one home, and at that stage I would have said Ballymena looked relatively comfortable. There hadn't been too many hairy moments. Second half, Loughgall just looked like a completely different team. They moved the ball so quickly, and their pace and their movement, and I mean the goals were sort of classic strikers finishes. Nathaniel Ferris got a couple, and Andrew Hoey popped up with one that day. I was really impressed that day, but I was even more impressed last week. I was covering the Loughgall's win over Larne, and they were terrific once again. I mean, I think one of the things about it, they've kind of shown as well, a promoted club coming up, you don't have to throw a huge amount of money at it as some teams think. And the other thing which Dean Smith was telling me is he hasn't gone out and just sort of signed players willy-nilly. There's a lot of that squad this season, or the squad which have been patiently building and trying to get out of the championship for the past few years before they managed it last season. The core of that squad is still there, and what Dean has tried to do is maybe identify particular areas where he could strengthen. And I mean, it's a good honest panel of players, and they work so hard. One really good signing for me for Loughgall has been Jay Boyd on loan from Crusaders. Now, he was a player I was aware of him. I haven't seen an awful lot of him. I knew he was very, very highly rated at Crusaders. So I remember hearing somebody talking about him, he may be the possible long-term successor to Jordan Owens. Watched him at particularly close quarters against Larne. Big, strong lad, really good at holding the ball up, bringing others into play. And again, then he scored the goal at Solitude on Saturday, which earned Loughgall another really good point. The thing about, I think, particularly for a newly promoted team, you probably have to sort of make hay while the sun shines, while there's still that bit of a surprise element. And Loughgall have certainly done that. They have put themselves in a very good position. Probably they may find themselves being dragged down a bit as we go into the sort of the long winter months, and the injuries and the suspensions start to kick in. But what they have done in the early months of the season, Peter, has been absolutely remarkable.
You're totally correct. No one is going to be surprised by Loughgall right now when you beat the champions on one of these Tuesday nights where the champions have been sitting up sipping sports drinks at 3 p.m. in the afternoon while all these Loughgall players are, I don't know, just at hard labour doing the work. They're still able to step up, and Lauren, like, Loughgall missed a penalty at that point.
Yeah.
Then Lauren go down to 10 men, and there's a little bit of magic from Benji McGee that gets the goal and gets that win. That game against Cliftonville, it's an early goal for Cliftonville from a set piece, but Loughgall, they don't get put off. They hunker in. They absorb the pressure. They ride the wave, are lucky with a couple of breaks. A wee Ben Wilson miss here or there, and a Joe Gormley miss hit, a pass not absolutely hitting their target, and then they pounce, they get their goal, and most of that second half that I watched, they looked really, really sturdy. They were willing to take on all the attacks as they come, and they could break away very, very easily. And you brought up something there about Dean Smith, which I think is going unnoticed, that he is also playing his role here. He built this team, he brought them all together, but he was able to do adjustments at halftime in that Ballymena game, where after being the main dominant team that first half against Ballymena, they then run away with it in the second half and get all the goals. He changed the team significantly, it felt like, in that Lauren game, bringing on players like Mark Carson and stuff like that, changed up the shape, and it worked a charm. Like, he is willing to take risks, and he is willing to move his squad, and it's just something that is very rare at that area that people believe they are in the league, and currently they're not. They're sitting there in the top 6, so they are getting the points, and it is about getting points on the board to stay away from that area. And unfortunately for both Lord and Cliftonville, they have just come on the wrong end of a team brimming with confidence and is actually quite astute. That's the most surprising thing. It's just not headless chickens. They are very coy.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Actually, I actually asked Dean after the Larne game. I think he had made 6 changes or something from the side which had lost against Loughgall, and he said, "Look, it's not in any way a reflection of how we had done against Linfield the previous Saturday." Basically, he says the reason he makes so many changes is they put so much into each game. They absolutely leave nothing out there at all. It's they put 100% into those games, and he says then he freshens it up. He could do it even after a positive result. He could still make 3 or 4 changes. He has done everything superbly so far. They have done absolutely brilliant. There's one other strange thing, just Peter, about that Loughgall's win over Larne. It must be I'm sure it's the first and probably the last time I'll ever see a match where the same goalkeeper receives 2 red cards in the same game. He got sent off
twice, kinda.
It's a very strange one, because he gave away the penalty, Rowan Ferguson, the Larne goalkeeper, and Tony Clark showed him a red card. And I remember thinking at the time that seemed strange, because there's obviously that double jeopardy rule now, where if you give away a penalty, it's unless the referee thinks that he hasn't made a genuine attempt to go for the ball, it'll be a yellow card rather than a red. I think Tony quickly maybe realised his error and gave him a yellow card. And of course, then to add insult to injury, then Rowan Ferguson, having got his reprieve, then saves the resultant penalty. And as you can imagine, Dean Smith on the touchline was having a fairly lengthy chat with the 4th official about that. But then, having had that reprieve, Rowan Ferguson then was indeed sent off in the second half for handling the ball outside his area, and that was one of the easiest decisions I think Tony Clark will ever have to make in his refereeing career. So I think that just sort of set the seal on a miserable night for Larne. I think it was just one of those nights where I think if they'd still been playing until now, I don't think they would have scored. But they very quickly regained their form at the weekend at Glenavon.
And a refereeing decision played somewhat of a part in it. In what was the maiden voyage under the SS McDonnell for Glenavon. A similar sight it was to be seen, with Robbie Garrett getting, which I heard was his 14th red card of his career. Let's get to it. Do you think it was a red card? Because I'm not sure if it really warranted it, but I know plenty of people who think I'm a bit cuckoo for thinking that it
Peter,
might just have been a harsh yellow.
we're back to that old debate, isn't it? I mean, we know how wholehearted a competitor Robbie Garrett is, and then he's made a career out of that sort of, crunching midfield challenge there. Unfortunately, just the sort of the world we live in nowadays. I mean, it gives the referee a decision to make, doesn't it? And really, probably up until that point, I think I read afterwards there that Stephen McDonald said he had been quite happy with what he had seen so far. But I think if you go down a man against Larne as early as that in the game, I think you're in for a very difficult afternoon, and that's how it proved.
Don't give Bonus the chances that he had. Andy Ryan gets taken off after 13 minutes, and Bonus is welcomed into the Larne side again with what was a hat-trick within 10 minutes or so. He is ruthless. All those attackers are flying at the minute for Larne. It's a day that Glenavon will want to forget about. But some really impressive bits of play here from Larne. My pick of the bunch, well, it was Dylan Sloan's goal where he picks up the ball from his own half, goes on a wander, gets into the other box, and ball passes around the box, and he's the man to swing his boot and get the goal. And it's just one of these. He feels like to me, and perhaps I've said this before, like the first Larne original who has been developed through this system, this factory system that could produce some of the best talent this country can produce. But it's a really mean looking squad now, and now that they're finding their rhythm again, no one will want to come into the way of the Larne buzzsaw, and they looked fairly unstoppable there, and they take the 3 points and will march on.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan Sloan actually is a very good case in point, Peter, there. I remember last season, the second half of the season, Larne sent Dylan Sloan and Matthew Lusty on loan to Newry. And I remember sort of looking at team sheets each week, and probably maybe, I think just sort of from memory, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but it seemed that maybe Matthew Lusty maybe would have started more games. Dylan Sloan would have been on the bench quite a bit for Newry. Quite often, the pair of them would have been on the bench. And I remember thinking at the end of the season, I wonder what the future holds for those two young lads now going back to Larne. I was expecting an influx of more top quality signings from Larne. And come the start of this season, I was watching the stream pictures of Larne's first Champions League game in Helsinki against HJK. And Dylan Sloan was the best player. First of all, I was slightly surprised that he was in the starting lineup. He was the best player in the pitch, Peter, by some distance. He was superb.
I don't know. Has he grown out? Is it a stature thing or something? Because he looks so confident on the ball, and he's willing to take that gamble, and he's scoring a surprising amount of goals at the minute, and they all come from him gambling, committing, getting into the box and latching onto a ball. And he isn't really the same type of player as Soulé, but Larne took a risk, and they didn't go over the top to try and keep Soulé, and they brought other players in. So I'm not saying they just said, you've got the keys to the castle here, Dylan. But he is one of the players that's really emerged for me from that Larne side, and will be the poster boy if he sticks around or even progresses and moves on, to say, despite this team being packed to the brim with talent, if you're good enough and if you work hard enough, and even if it doesn't go absolutely sterlingly at a club on loan, which I'm sure a lot of this youth system of Larne will go over the years, you'll be given an opportunity, and if you grasp it with both hands, they will give you the chance to be a key part of this team. And for Larne, I think they'll be happy, if you're a Larne fan, that the early stutters that came at the start of the season, where it's a different kind of second season syndrome. They were probably feeling, oh, has everyone found us out, and perhaps are we not as good as last year? And there's plenty of more bodies that have been added that are probably still figuring things out within that team where they fit, but they look like a rather imposing outfit right now that nobody really would want to face. And
Yeah, I mean, you think of it as well, Peter. There, I mean, I know Andrew Ryan went off early on. I'm not sure as to the extent of his injury, but you know, they're able to bring on Lee Bonner, and Lee Bonner probably has been almost a wee bit sort of subdued by his high standards of from last season. He's been a wee bit subdued this year. That 10-minute hat trick could be just the very thing to start him off. And again, I think it was Lee Bonus who had missed out. I think possibly through illness a couple of weeks ago. Paul O'Neill came in, banged in a couple. I mean, it really is the phrase "embarrassment of riches" there could well be used to describe Larne's attacking threat.
a team who found their attacking mojo again on Saturday was Crusaders when they got 4 goals away from home up at the Coleraine Showgrounds. They contributed 4 goals in what was probably one of the worst weeks that Owen Kearney's had as Coleraine manager. He played against 2 really tough teams, both of the North Belfast sides. It was Cliftonville up at Solitude on Tuesday, who hammered them 5-0, and then Crusaders drubbed them on their home patch 9-0 across 180 minutes. I know Owen Kearney was fuming post-game, particularly after the Cliftonville game, but particularly defensively, they are all over the shop. That is 7 days they'll want to forget.
I mean, it's so un-Coleraine like, and it's so unlike an Owen Kearney team to be taken apart like that. I mean, normally Owen's teams are so well set up and so well structured, and I think there's possibly maybe been a few sort of tactical tweaks and formation changes there this season, different personnel as well. But really, there's something just not right at the moment there. When a team with as much quality in it, the Glackens, the McKendrys, the Shevlins, I mean, there's something strange when I wonder when the last time Coleraine had bad results back to back like that. There, it must be a very long time ago.
Only because I hear the Coleraine fans shouting at their podcast players to give Coleraine a bit of a bye-ball here. 3 of those goals were scored in the last 10 minutes, and probably argue that taking off Darren Cole at the back and sticking on Andrew Mitchell up top alongside throwing on McDaid and Jack O'Mahony just beforehand as well, that probably doesn't help those goals going in the last 10 minutes. So they're pushing up and they got very much caught, but the stats still read the same. That's a get-right game for Crusaders every day of the week. They'll want to get their confidence back again. Philip Lawry's back scoring absolute bangers again. That was a great strike for that goal. A pretty nice little finish as well from O'Rourke. But Coleraine fans, I hear their frustration, especially after such a big fight back against Glentoran only a few days beforehand. So I know at the back they've had injuries, they've had a lot of change in shape the odd time, but this is a big coaching job for Owen Kearney, because he will not want this to continue. He'll want to snap them out of this instantly, and maybe Glenavan's the right game to do it in.
Yeah, I mean, you do wonder as well, Peter, if sort of subconsciously what's happening off the pitch at Coleraine, and there's obviously some great plans in place there with the investment, and presumably they'll be sort of the next to go down the full-time route. You do maybe wonder if in the here and now some people are maybe taking their eye off the ball and maybe sort of getting too far ahead. I mean, I think there's that sort of interesting subplot as well if that comes when that move comes towards full time. A few people have asked me the question, what will happen with Owen there? Will Owen go with it, the full time model, or will Owen obviously he might be one of these people for whom part time alongside his teaching career might suit better. So I mean, there'll be something there to be looked at further down the line with that one as well.
I think that is a really strong point, and it's something that I have seen talked about, but we don't know what could happen there. And for Coleraine, they have a big couple of months ahead. I heard Owen Kearney very clearly say, look, this takeover isn't absolutely signed, or the investment isn't signed, sealed, delivered all that type of stuff. There's still things to happen in the background, but Korean, any kind of push towards the top of the table looks to be blunt and stunted, and its results like the past week, which will just really stick in the teeth of Korean fans. But let's keep that smile on your face nice and wide, Mr. Alexander, as we chat about this Ballymena performance against Dungannon Swifts, which has really blown the bottom of the league completely wide open. Noah Stewart will get the credit. He's the brilliant story for getting the goal. But there is one man who earned these points for Ballymena, and that has to be Sean O'Neill. What an amazing performance in goals. He kept Ballymena in this game with some brilliant saves, and he gave them the opportunity, the platform for Ballymena to go up at the other end of the pitch and get that goal late.
Yeah, very much so. I think Sean there, it was. I think someone described it to me as he rolled back the years. I don't think Sean would take too kindly there to suggesting that he's as old as that. But I think there's still plenty of football in Sean yet. But no, a terrific performance. I mean, I wouldn't say, Peter, they were like world class saves. You know, they were saves that you would expect a keeper of Sean's caliber to make, but they were so vitally important in keeping Ballymena in the game. Not least the penalty save from Keelan Dillon, which, I mean, it wasn't a bad penalty. It was a really good save to get down as low as that. I spoke to Jim Urban after the game, and he was saying that, you know, Sean O'Neill sets really high standards and he has really high demands of his teammates. And, you know, he's right in what he said, Jim. Like, Sean has played consistently well this season, even in the defeats. His role has actually been in keeping the scoreline down in some of those defeats. On Saturday, his contribution actually enabled Ballymena to go on and get a positive result, which was obviously a big plus after what has been a very difficult start.
I think you're downplaying some of these saves. The Ethan Devine one, I'm just looking back on it again, where the ball comes in from Maguire. That is pretty much point blank that he needs to get his hand up there. It was a performance that I just thought was really needed in the way that game was going. I actually thought Dungannon were excellent in parts and threw men forward, and for a team that hasn't always been the most free-flowing going forward, I thought they had a pretty good day, bar the fact that they just couldn't get it in the goal. And that's when you leave the door open like that, these are the results that can come your way. Right now, you've talked to Jim Irvin a fair bit. This has been a tough task for him, coming in, taking over a team who has had a dreadful calendar year. Even before he took over, he's got a limited budget to build a squad that had plenty of bodies, some key players leave. You know, Ross Redmond isn't exactly in the prime of his career, but he contributed a lot of assists and was integral to set plays and a lot of different things like that. And you're well stocked at wing backs, but he tried to get this team up and running. And as much as I don't think they've had a game where they look to dominate the match, they've got 7 points. And now, where I said a few weeks ago they could get cut adrift, they've now dragged a lot of teams into this little area of the table, and one of them that's right there with them is Dungannon. 9th to 12th, you've got the Swifts, Glenavon, Newry and Ballymena, and only 1 point separates them. 3 are on 7 points. There's going to be, I know there's only 10 games played, but you know how these games go at the bottom of the league. Oftentimes, it's these games which decide your fate, but with the teams around you. And these games are going to be fight till the deaths. They are going to be gripping encounters. They're not always the most entertaining football games, but as spectacle dramas, they can be thrilling in their own way.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right there, Peter. If you look through the fixture list each week and you see a meeting of two of those sort of bottom six teams, or teams who might even be tipped to finish in the bottom four, you're thinking that's a real dogfight there. I know Rodney McAree was hugely disappointed on Saturday, just a sort of feeling of a man who just had his pocket picked there just right at the end of the game. Dungannon, I would say Rodney would be fairly happy with Dungannon's performance, but what they just could not do was find a way past Sean O'Neill. I mean, just you touched upon there the situation that Jim had inherited. I mean, I don't think anyone should underestimate just how big a task it actually was, because when he came in the summer, Ballymena weren't in a good way even at that stage, and people say, oh, sure they got to the Irish Cup final, it can't have been that bad, but you actually mentioned it there. The calendar year of 2023 has been pretty much an annus horribilis for Ballymena so far. They've played since the 1st of January, they played 29 league games, Peter. They've won 6 out of those 29. It's really a miserable run of form. There was an absolute horror run in the early part of the year where Ballymena went 14 league games without a win. And while that was going on, they were sort of gradually progressing through rounds in the Irish Cup, and in a large sense that sort of masked what was going on, at least maybe to people looking in from the outside. But I mean, the Irish Cup final, as you know, was a massive disappointment, and it was no great surprise, certainly to Ballymena fans, that a change took place just a few days after that. I mean, you just to go back again to this year of 2023, it didn't start well for Ballymena with those lurid headlines about the club's financial position. I mean, I think the reality wasn't just quite as bad as that. Basically, what it was that when the previous chairman, John Taggart, stepped down after 9 years in charge, that was around about this time last year. The interim board who took over, they were looking at the finances, and they were thinking, here we can't go on like this. There was too much money going out, and that's why there were so many players moved on in the January transfer window. It had a bit of a feel of a fire sale about it, but it was more a case just of balancing the books until the end of the season. And even with that, one of the first things that Jim had to do was to offload some of the big wage earners, the people like David McDade and David Parkhouse. So really, he hasn't had a big budget to work with, and he's had to shop around accordingly. Quite a few players have come in on loan, and some of those players like Isaac Westendorf and Fraser Taylor and Donald Robs, they've made a good impression, but I suppose, Peter, the loan market is always fraught with danger, because if their parent clubs are to recall them in January, Ballymena would be right back to square one again.
What was the temperature like round the showgrounds? You have that win against Carrick a couple of weeks ago, which was the first win after a decent enough stretch. I do know, I can see there's only 10 games being played, and you've got the 6 points on the board. But was there any itchy feet? Was there any discussions at all that you were hearing in the terraces where people are thinking, oh my goodness, we're on a bad path here. Do we need to act now, even early doors?
I didn't ever get that impression, Peter. I think Jim will get time to try and rebuild it, because I think everybody is aware just of the magnitude of what has to be done. Really, you touched upon it earlier there, that the big danger was of Ballymena getting absolutely cut adrift at the bottom, and having to play catch up. Just think how many points they were even behind, say, Loughgall. So no, I don't think there was any danger of that there. I think Jim will have the backing of the supporters. Really now Ballymena have clawed themselves back into, sort of they can see the coattails of the teams above them. And again, I mean, this Saturday, Ballymena have Newry at home.
It's a brilliant
which
fixture.
Is another of those massive meetings of bottom 6 teams, as like the bottom 2 teams. And I suppose there's the potential psychological boost for Ballymena. If they can win, they'll move off the bottom of the table for virtually the first time this season. So a huge game.
It's such a look what you could have won result for Dungannon, because they've now let you back in it, even at this stage where there's 1 point difference, when a victory there, if just one of those, the penalty had went in, the Ethan Devine chance had went in, they're sitting pretty, 10 points, and they're looking down at you with a 7-point swing at that stage, would it be? Yes, a 7-point swing. So thinking we've got to play them a few more times, we can push on. But Glenavon have got to change things up. Newry are on a winless run at the minute going against Ballymena. Ballymena have struggled to get goals. They're the lowest scorers in the league. We'll get onto that game later between those two, but I'm going to be talking about this, I think, between now and the end of the season. I'm sure maybe one team will push on and get away, or they'll just maybe drag even a character out into it. But a title race that they're starting to see a bit of daylight now between Linfield and even Cliftonville in third. There's 5 points already, and they're looking fantastic right now, the Blues. It's at the bottom of the table where we could just see all the action and all the drama.
Yeah, I mean there will be some monumental games at the bottom end of the table. It's the it's just the pressure's intense because I mean nobody wants to slip through that trap door because I think everybody knows what the implications of relegation are for any of those clubs down around the bottom there. And of course, you slip down into the championship. It's no cakewalk getting back out of that there, as even Portadown are finding this season. It is a hugely competitive division, and obviously any team that's relegated, there'll be probably a big overhaul of players, and again, you're sort of cutting your cloth according to budgets. So it's a massive incentive, Peter, to stay in the top flight.
We now swap our view from the past and into the future, and a couple of mega games. And as I alluded to earlier, nothing is bigger in this country quite like when Linfield play Glentoran. It's at Windsor Park this time around. It's on the TV, so you can all watch it if you're not there in person. It's the team who are dealing with injuries and are on a 3-game winless run against a side who's scoring goals, have found their groove. Now it's their 3rd game in a row at home. There will be an expectancy from the Linfield fans to put Glentoran to the sword, but typically in these games it feels like this is the fixture where both teams' fortunes flip, or it's a crossroads game. I'm not saying I'm betting in favour of Glentoran on this occasion, but it would be very, very typical that this is a repeat of that huge victory Glentoran got last year at around this time, around the 15th of October last year. I even remember the date. That's how significant that was. A 3-0 win that they had. So perhaps it could be on. Feeney could be showing that game from last year, beating their chest. Here we go. But for Linfield, the pressure is on in a way. In front of their home crowd, this is a must-win, especially with Larne just up the motorway playing at exactly the same time. They'll know the score at that time, and they'll not want to slip to let the Invermen in at all. Do you believe in the underdog and in Glentoran this time round at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's on current form, Peter. It looks like the proverbial no-brainer, doesn't it? You would say, yeah, Linfield every day of the week. But I mean, you've touched upon it there. We've seen it so many times before in this fixture. All it takes is for the side who are maybe struggling, scratching for form a bit. I mean, we said earlier, you look at that Glentoran team, there is no shortage of quality in that. Why not? There's a big performance, you would imagine, in that team. It wouldn't surprise me if Glentoran were to come away with a point or even better. But I mean, what an occasion it's going to be.
Very much so. I'm going to say 3-1 to the Blues. Early penalty for the Glens. I'm going to decide Junior scores the goal, and then it's a big second half from the Blues, and it's the usual players who are getting the goals for them. Let's go to that game that is also being played on a Friday night up at Inver. Larne against Crusaders. Crusaders just looked so fantastic at the start of the season. Crusaders, last time they were there, it was the Community Charity Shield, whatever that game's called, where Crusaders were able to deal with everything that Larne threw at them. Larne are very much a different side, and talk about night and day sides right now. Crusaders will think, however this season goes, unless there is a Gibson Cup sitting on the shore road in black and red ribbons, they'll be thinking, how could this season have been if we had just not had that Jimmy Calgaren injury? Because that is the moment their season has took a complete nosedive.
And to be fair, it's perhaps I don't know if nosedive is overstating it, maybe just a bit of a wobble because I absolutely agree with what you were saying there. I've seen Crusaders a few times this season. They have been superb. I watched Crusaders. I was covering the Crusaders Carrick game, the 9-0 at Seaview, and it was one of the best ever team performances I've ever witnessed in the Irish League. I think what really impressed me, Peter, so much about it was at no point, even when they were 5 or 6-0 up, there was no thought at all of taking the foot off the gas there. They were relentless. That night, I am not joking, had it not been for Ross Glendinning and goal for Carrick, you could have been looking at a scoreline of 14 or 15. It was an incredible performance. The Callagher injury is a really huge blow. I mean, a key player at both ends of the pitch. Obviously, he's at the linchpin of the defence as well, and we know how dangerous he is in the opposing penalty area. But again, I noticed Crusaders have Josh Robinson back again, gives them another defensive option alongside a player who I think has really blossomed and who I don't think maybe he gets the plaudits he deserves is Daniel Larmour, who I think has developed into a really good Irish League central defender.
Well, they'll need a big performance from Daniel Larmour if he is to be a part of this crew that is going to somehow stop a eventual potential trifecta of Ryan, Bonus, and O'Neill coming at them throughout this game on their home patch. It would take a bold man to say that Crusaders are going to shut them out and get a result away from home despite their 4-0 win against Coleraine over the weekend. Which is why I'm not going to predict that, and you've just got to believe that Larne are going to score the goals. Despite the slip-ups that Larne have had, they are just throwing the ball in the opposition's net for fun, and when they do that, they have plenty of slippage for something going wrong at the other end of the pitch. They aren't as stingy at the back as they were last season, but they don't need to be if they're thumping teams and scoring loads, unless, of course, you're against Dungannon and they just give it up late. So, victory for Larne there. Saturday afternoon. And I'm not saying it because you're here. My big game of the weekend. Ballymena host Newry City. A fascinating doubleheader between these two teams last year when they played each other. Was it like Friday and Monday or Friday and Tuesday or something like that? Where did you both share victories? There was late goals and all the rest. Like this has the chance to be a rather tasty fixture. I know every time Ballymena and Glenavon play each other, there's usually some sort of fireworks. But this could be the low-key entertaining game.
Yeah, well, let's hope it's a good game. Obviously, there's an awful lot at stake for both teams. I mean, if you look at Newry's situation, I think Gary Boyle has a very difficult job on his hands. I mean, difficult from the outset to replace Darren Mullen after all that Darren did for the club and where he brought Newry from to regain their Premiership status. I mean, I can fully understand why Newry went for a bit of continuity by appointing Gary, who was Darren's assistant. But again, I think Peter, like a lot of the bottom six teams, Newry probably don't score as many goals as they would like. If you look around those teams in the bottom four, bottom five, you really kind of struggle to see a 10 or a 15 goal a season striker. I mean, the games between those bottom sides are just so important because it's hard to see too many of those teams taking points maybe off the top six, although Loughgall have proved fairly adept at it recently.
It's the leakiest defence against the worst attack in the league. Something's gotta give, baby. That means it may be a goal fest. I don't know, but surely if Ballymena can't get more than one goal in this game at home, where are they going to get it? Where is it going to happen?
Yeah, the goals obviously have proved hard to come by. I think Colin Coates is still the Ballymena's leading goal scorer this season there, which again proves how big a threat he is from set pieces. Again, the young lad who you mentioned earlier, Noah Stewart.
Yes, what a story that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great story, wasn't it? Real sort of Roy of the Rovers stuff. I mean, younger listeners will be going, "What? Who's this Roy of the Rovers?" But I think I'm showing my age a bit there. But Jim was saying afterwards that young Noah Stewart, he's a young lad who'd actually been playing in Linfield's reserve team last year. He joined Ballymena. He'd actually only started training with the first team, very recently. And as Jim described it, he put a couple of senior players on their backsides in training. So, and I think that the coaching staff were sort of looking, going, there might be something about this kid. So they decided to put him in the squad on Saturday when Isaac Westendorf was out injured. So I mean, it certainly paid off handsomely. I mean, I think he's a local boy as well. He's from the Ballymena area, which I think that's important as well. To have some sort of identity within the local community for a club like Ballymena. You look at when Craig Farquhar broke through last season. It gave even Ballymena's youth academy a real boost because the coaches there can point to Craig and to the likes of Leroy Miller who had come before him and say, look, there's a pathway there, from the youth academy to the first team. So again, hopefully, maybe Noah Stewart might be the next person at Ballymena to make the breakthrough.
Could he pop up with a goal? We'll have to see. I'm going to stick my neck on the line, and I don't know if you like it. I'm going to say 2-2 down at the showgrounds between Ballymena and Newry. Cliftonville try to shake off getting Loughgall at Solitude by inviting Dungannon up to Solitude, a team who gave Cliftonville a banana skin or two. They were the team that came in and somewhat killed off their season last year, booting them out of the Irish Cup on one of the games and getting a victory to pretty much derail any hope of a title charge for Cliftonville. Dungannon will want to react instantly after that game that they don't get the points against Ballymena at home. But this is what this league is like. If you don't take your chances, all of a sudden you could be stuck on a really difficult run. Cliftonville have so much going forward for them. We talk about their goal threat. In many ways, they are scoring themselves out of trouble. And you've got to believe with a returning and hungry Joe Gormley back in the side and Rowan Wilson always being that predator in the box, I just think that despite Ethan Devine getting goals in this team and finding his footing within the starting 11, I've got to give this to a multi-goal victory to Cliftonville.
I've been very impressed, Peter, with what I've seen of Cliftonville this season. There's plenty of goals in that side. Sam Ashford, Ben Wilson have done superbly well since coming in, and then of course you've got Joe Gormley back and still as hungry as ever for goals. I mean, just can you imagine being a striker there in that side with the likes of Rory Hale and Ronan Doherty and Chris Gallagher pulling the strings behind there? Can you just imagine the amount of openings you must be created there? I know obviously Jim Magilton and Gerard Little, they maybe to describe it as getting a bit of a lukewarm reception from Cliftonville fans. That appointment, I think that may be being a tad generous. I don't think they were flavour of the month at all. But it's funny what a few multi-goal victories there, how that can change fans' opinions. So again, like yourself, I think I would fancy Cliftonville in that one.
Are Coleraine gonna get good and shake off the past week at home, or is the McDonald era going to start proper when Glenavon go up to Coleraine? This is always like a bizarro fixture at times where Coleraine beat Glenavon when they're on a good run, or Glenavon thump Coleraine when it looks as though they're going to challenge for the title. I just can't predict a 0-0 for Coleraine right now, and Glenavon, despite the new manager, are still finding it tough to get whoever their striker's going to be and get the goals. Plenty of work still to be done for McDonald, and away up at the showgrounds is a very tough assignment. So I'm going to back Coleraine to get back on track and get the goals.
Yeah, I mean, as you say there, Glenavon have had some sort of unexpected victories at Coleraine in recent seasons there. Maybe at times when really you would have fancied Coleraine to go on and win. It's a very, very difficult game to call. I mean, I think that the thing with Steve McDonnell coming in at this stage, I think the difficulty with that, Peter, is the transfer window has passed, and it's quite a long time until the January one in relative terms. So, I mean, he's going to have to work with what's there. I'm sure he will have one eye. He'll be identifying areas, and I'm sure Steve McDonnell will have a very good knowledge of the player market in the Republic of Ireland. There, I'm sure he'll have worked with plenty of players at clubs at Dundalk and at Shelbourne there. But again, like a lot of the clubs in the bottom six, there's maybe there are good wholehearted, good honest players at Glenavon, but like a lot of the clubs in the bottom six, they're maybe struggling for that wee bit of quality. And really, I think again that Glenavon will be wanting to make sure that they're just above that sort of danger zone by the time they get to January, and when Steve McDonnell can start to make a few changes and put his own stamp on that team.
Well, he's going to have to deliver with the aspect of management, which I think at Ash League level often gets somewhat disregarded. The coaching element of it, it's the player development. Yes, they've got the tactics and the picking the team, but these managers also, to earn their cheddar, is they need to make players better. And I think that's a key aspect of why he's been brought into this job, is that he has been working throughout the League of Ireland, working with young players, trying to develop footballers who will eventually go on into full-time setups. So he's there to not only tactically make this team better, but he's got to try and get the absolute most out of these players and try and find a way that's working. He's there to try and squeeze that extra bit of juice from the current lemon that is this squad before he can go out and grab more. But I just think, despite their recent woes, Coleraine will find something to get the win here. And if they don't, boom, I'm hitting the crisis button right now, because Coleraine fans are going to be in disarray of what's going to happen next. But the other big game, the neutral bowl, let's call it, Carrick go to Lakeview Park. Oh, if I wasn't already assigned elsewhere, I would love to go to this game. The informed team of this season, Loughgall, against everybody's wild card from last season. Will Carrick take that momentum against their biggest win of the season and go away from home and show Loughgall what a Premiership team is all about? Or is Loughgall going to keep this fun train, this train of love going? I've got to believe at home. It's not been the place where they're getting all their points, but this Loughgall team are bringing with confidence, and I don't know if Carrick are going to be the team that's going to knock them off their pedestal right now. It might be a draw, perhaps like a 0-0, just because Carrick were able to hold off the Loughgall goal scorers, but Carrick haven't had a particularly great defensive record, so I've got to believe that Loughgall will get the goals to win this at home.
Yeah, I can just imagine if you were a Loughgall player or the coaching staff or Dean Smith at the minute, you'd be just literally counting down the days to the next match. They just probably can't come quickly enough at the minute, the matches. I mean, when you have that momentum and that enthusiasm and enjoyment, you'll really be just absolutely buzzing for the next game. And that is a game that Loughgall will be looking at. Go, we can pick something else up here again. We can add to our points tally. Carrick, I'm sure, will be looking to follow up from that win against Glentoran there. That Stuart will probably be thinking to himself, right, it really is high time now that we stitch together a few results and lift ourselves up the table, because I think Carrick's positions maybe just a wee bit false at this stage. I think they are better than what they've showed so far this season.
And I'm sure Dean Smith will just have Oren Brugan just at anywhere near the halfway mark. See that fella Perkis on him, shut him down. And if they can shut down players like him and Tilney, Loughgall will have a great chance of winning this game. And I know this is early days to say, but we are on. I don't think anybody's saying Loughgall are like totally safe and they're fine, but like they are actually quite close based on previous history. They've got 15 points now. 9 points. They get a victory on Saturday. 2 more perhaps by Christmas. Like 24 points. you'll fall into a draw, even if it all falls off. They can all of a sudden stop forgetting about worrying about potentially being stuck in the relegation mire, and they can think, have we got enough to sneak higher or get 7th place? But look, Dean Smith will hate people like us talking about that. They want to take every game at a time, and you're right, that momentum of just wanting to play in the next game, you cannot buy that. I must say, after a few weeks where it felt as though we were either short on goals or short on big headlines, this weekend absolutely delivered, and I'm really hoping that momentum that some of these teams have, they can bring it into next weekend, and I have another podcast that's just bursting with all the storylines that come out from it. Mr. Alexander, our time has come to an end. Our train is closing into the station. Lots of great stuff in there. Thank you so much for sitting down and chatting to me this week. You are an absolute joy as always. If they want some Stephen Alexander on a 24/7 basis, you might not be providing them with content of all those hours of the day, but where can they find some of your finest work on the line?
Well, they can follow some of my live text updates on the BBC Sports NI website. I'm covering Ballymena against Newry this Saturday, the game which you're looking forward to so eagerly there. And as well as that, they can follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Stephen_sport.
Stephen, an absolute pleasure as always. Till next time, chat to you soon.
Thank you, Peter. Take care.
Another big double week for you on the podcast front. Your usual episode here, and the bonus one, which you've probably checked out by now, my interview with Gerard Lawlor. And I've got to give you, listening to this right now, a big thank you. I do not think that they open that email from me and say, yeah, let this boy into the office to talk to our CEO, if it wasn't for the fact that they can tell that I've got you who are keen to get answers, who are keen to listen. And I always appreciate any share, follow, listen, rating that anybody, even like interaction to the polls that you give. I really appreciate that. And interviewing Gerard was a nice little milestone for this podcast. Haven't done an interview before, and to be honest, it was just a great time to get involved. It was just a great thing for me to put a lot of the questions which I know that you are keen to get answers for. Hopefully I was able to deliver some sort of information that would help you along the way, but I've just got to say a massive thank you. But if you like this, and maybe you're like new to the pod this week, you gotta know, if you want to know more, you want to follow this thing, you can subscribe or follow this podcast on whatever platform you're on. If you're on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, if you want to follow me on social media, great place to do it, highly recommend it. I'm at Kicking Match on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. And of course, if you want to take this wireless hands-free, you can always ask your smart speaker and just go, hey smart speaker, please play Kicking Match, an Irish League podcast. Like I said in the pod, another fun weekend of games. Thanks for listening. Until next time, tally ho, cheerio.